Yeah, well, good morning. It's great to be a part of this chapel. You may know James Whitfield, the SGA president. He is the one in the attractive shirt. So James and I have been talking about how do we think about leading the Azusa Pacific University community. Two presidents. How do we think about your journey? How do we think about preparing you for who we hope you will respond to in God's call in your life? So I'm going to set up our conversation by going to a familiar story. The scripture won't be on the screens, but you will remember the story of the Good Samaritan. It's from Luke chapter 10. Down the front row are guys who are in a D group that I'm in, and we're in the book of Luke. It's good to have you guys. Also in the front row are the Mighty Orioles, the walkabout team I was with, who taught me to use the word fleek. I'm not sure exactly if I'll use that beyond just now this morning, but it means on point. And certainly who we are becoming in this community to prepare us for God's future is absolutely on point with God's plan for us. So Luke, this story starts, you may remember, Jesus is speaking to a group of people. The text says, an expert in the law comes to him and says, look, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? And he says, what does the text say? And he says, love God and love my neighbor. And Jesus says, that's true. And then the person who is an expert in the law, so he knows, of course, the greatest commandment is love God and love your neighbor, has a little bit of a problem with Jesus right there. He wants to split hairs because apparently it matters to him who his neighbor is. I don't know if it's hard for him to decide in the masses of people around him, but clearly he has different classes of neighbors. Those he should care for and those he shouldn't. So Jesus runs into that familiar story, and he says, okay, let me tell you about your neighbor. He says, there was a man traveling from Jerusalem, south out of the city, and he is set on by robbers. They beat him, they take his money, they lead him bleeding beside the road. And along comes a priest, and probably on the road to Jerusalem, this could be a priest who is preparing to go to the temple or to conduct a religious service, and the Jewish traditions would really keep him from coming in contact with blood, say from a man who's just been beaten and laying on the side of the road, because then there'd be a whole bunch of hassle. He'd have to go through a whole ritual of purifying himself again. So he passes on the other side of the street. Next in line is a Levite, also a person who would be absolutely familiar with the law, so he would know that in the Jewish law, it's actually required of a Jewish citizen that if they see a wounded person or a person in need, they need to stop and give help. But these two pass by a fellow Jew and leave him alongside the road. And then Jesus said, a Samaritan. Now that would have a lot of power in his audience, because 100 years before the birth of Christ, Jews who have had a long history since the 9th century BC of racial angst with the Jews, and beginning with the divided kingdom, 100 years before Christ, some Jews actually ransack and destroy the Samaritans' temple that is not in Jerusalem. 100 years then forward, at the birth of Christ, a band of Samaritans desecrate the Jewish temple by throwing the bones of dead people into the temple. It would be the equivalent of taking spray paint into an ethnic graveyard and spraying racial epitaphs on the tombstones. And the racial hatred and division between the Jew and the Samaritan is palatable. Actually, in chapter 9, just before this story of the Good Samaritan, Jesus and his disciples are actually threatened in Samaria when they pass through. So when Jesus says, and a Samaritan passes by, everybody in the audience is thinking, oh man, wonder what he'll do. And you know the story. The Samaritan sees the man. The text says the Samaritan pours wine and oil, bandages his wounds, puts him on his donkey, takes him to an inn where he stays with him overnight to help him recover. And the next day says to the innkeeper, when I return, if there is any more that I owe you for caring for this man, I'll take care of it. And then Jesus says to the expert in the law, who was the neighbor in this story? And the expert in the law, still not willing to use even the word Samaritan, says, well, I suppose it's the one who helped the stranger. So James and I want to talk to you about the kind of community that sees every person. The kind of community who's open to the interruptions that the Samaritan was open to, and not just an interruption, it's an invitation for others to come and join our journey such that it would even delay us. And the kind of community that would show the love and compassion, grace and mercy that the Samaritan in Jesus' story shows the man who is badly beaten. We would like to be a community that defines our neighbor as anybody, including those who are very different from us, that the Spirit of God leads us to be in contact with.
Yeah, and so in thinking about this passage, one that you're honestly probably tired of hearing. You're probably tired of hearing the summary of who the Samaritan is. I looked up Good Samaritan to find the passage yesterday. And what came up before the passage in the Bible was Good Samaritan ministries and Good Samaritan all these things, and the Good Samaritan Wikipedia page. It's something that is so common to our language in the United States that it loses its value. But I'm going to bring us back to the question of who is my neighbor? 8 weeks ago, I was asked by a good friend, Nate. We all have a Nate in our lives. And he asked me what the single thing that I would like to change about APU's community. If I could do anything as SGA president or as like a person in our community, what would that one thing be? And it was pretty simple for me. I said, we love God pretty well. We do God first pretty well. We do chapel. We have D groups. We do faith integration. It's something that we talk about a lot. But to be honest, we struggle with loving our neighbor as ourselves. And the reality is that we do have alpha groups. We have D groups. We have residence life, and we have all these other things that are wonderful and beautiful in the community that we profess to have for all of the members of our community. But in reality, we still have commuters that don't feel comfortable sitting on campus, and so they eat lunch in their cars. We have 40% of our population is commuters. We have transfer students that come here hoping to join into the beautiful community that they see, and they feel like they're unable to break through some sort of social wall. We have international students that want to be a part of our community that we offer to all. We also have residential students that just struggle to get involved. And this message is one that doesn't bring me like joy to say to all of you. It's one that I think it's important for us to recognize in all of our profession about community, and in the reality that we talk about Acts 2 community. I also looked up Acts 2. The Wikipedia page comes before the Bible verse. Because we talk about community as something that we do so well. And we talk about community of the breaking bread together with one another. But I feel like we're lacking what it truly means to love our neighbors as ourselves. And so that's what we're going to talk about. And we're talking about habits for doing that. When I was confronted these past weeks with students asking me, What do I do about racism? What do I do about tension? What do I do about these other things? The reality to that answer is, who is your neighbor? Who is the person that you're willing to love? Who is the person that you're willing to go out of your way to understand, to seek, to know, to find? I was struggling with answering that question to people because you can't do anything if you don't know people that are different than you. But it goes so much deeper than that. This last semester, I did research with the Office of Discipleship Ministry, and the goal of that research was to find a way that students connect to spiritual community. I asked the questions to different members of our community. Some of them were transfers, some were commuters, some were Catholic students, some were residential students that just had a hard time fitting in. And I asked them these questions about how they got involved. How did they get involved in our campus community? How did they get involved in spiritual community, into a D group or something like that? And I was planning in my mind, I was like, okay, I'm going to find the way. It's going to be like some sort of perfect advertisement scheme. It's going to be some social media attack. It's going to be, we're going to find some way that we can get every student involved, and it's just going to be so simple. We'll just like create a program and do it. But the thing that rose to the top in those interviews and conversations with people was that it wasn't some sort of social media scheme, and it wasn't something that was professed from chapel, but it was the reality that the only way people got involved in spiritual community is if they're invited to it. The only way that they're involved in spiritual community is if they're invited to it, and I am kind of sickened by how long that took my brain to process. Because in my church back home, we talked about bring-vitationology, bringing people to church and getting them to come with you and inviting people in to live a life with you. And the reality is, that is how we live out this thing that we're trying to do. That is the first step that we have in loving our neighbor. But it seems like it's actually even simpler than that. It's even simpler than giving out an invitation to someone. The Good Samaritan passage, it begins with the Good Samaritan being the first one that is actually willing to see the hurting man. It starts with him being willing to be interrupted by the hurting man's life and the hurting man's story. And then it continues with him actually living out what it means to truly love them. Because it does seem to be those three steps in anything that we do. First, we have to see someone. Then we have to be willing to interrupt them or be interrupted by them. And then we have to actually love them and try to see how to do that. And I want to start us off with seeing what it takes to actually see someone. Because what it takes to actually see someone is to be pulled out of our own distractions from them. The priest, I'm sure he was walking down that path thinking about how he was going to perform his rituals for the day. He was trying to memorize the law in his head. The Levite still was probably had some sort of social barriers that he had between him and the hurting man. Our social barriers are way more simple than that. Our social barriers are like our cell phones, that like we're unwilling to look at each other. Like, to be honest, like the way that we walk to class is that we look down at this little device so that we don't actually have to make eye contact with the people that are around us. And it's like troubling to me. And I'm so guilty of it. Like, this is not me saying that like I do this well and that I don't look at my phone and the phone is the devil. No, it's not the case. But how do we actually get out of our own heads? How do we get out of our own realities that we are creating for us on social media? And how do we get out of this thing that we have this little box that allows us everything that we need and everything that we want to see, but it forces us to not see the people that are around us? So, getting practical, how do we love our neighbor? And how do we see our neighbor? It first starts with kind of fasting. Fasting is whenever you take something out of your life so that God can fill that in a different way. One of the ways that we can fast is to maybe take one of your passing periods today between classes, or one of your times on the trolley, and put your cell phone in your pocket and actually like look around and see people. And allow God to maybe fill that time with asking a question to someone. Or maybe it's a prayer. You put your phone away and you're like, ask God to soften your heart to what someone else's need is. Maybe it's you see someone on Cougar Walk that you don't know and you actually just speak to them for the first time. Or someone that you keep on making eye contact with, or someone whose name you knew 2 years ago but you've forgotten at this point. You just strike up conversation with them. Also, this one is harder and a little bit more convicting, at least for me, is to make room in your group of friends for new people. What if we allowed someone else to join our story and join our community that we have? The one that we hold so sacred and the one that we're planning on having with us for the rest of our lives after college. What if we allowed other people to join into that? We desire to have people come around us in every way and to break bread together daily and add to our number daily those who are being saved, as we talk about in Acts 2. And we can do that. We really can do that. That's very possible for us to do. But it takes our first steps of first seeing one another, allowing ourselves to be interrupted by them, allowing ourselves to actually have to invite them along in our journey of life. My vision for the APU community is one that we're not just more social than we are. We're a very social place. People that come from off campus can come to our campus and know that we're very social. There's like lots of screaming up and down Cougar Walk. But what if it's a place of depth? What if it's a place that people know each other deeply? That when we're with our group of friends, that we can invite other people along, or that we aren't on our cell phones in those times. What if it is a place of depth? I hope that it's a place that is inclusive. I hope that it's a place that people that are unlike us, that don't run in our social circles, are able to come along with us in this thing that we call life. That we are able to invite others that are different, maybe for their differences or with their differences. But it all starts with the ability to see someone and then to speak with them and interrupt them. And then who knows what comes next. We have an opportunity with SGA that we're putting on in November 15th. It's called The Table. It happens every year, and this is the time when student government hosts a big dinner all the way up Cougar Walk. It's like 4:30 to 5:30 on Wednesday, November 15th. And it's an opportunity for you just to come and have interactions with people that are different than you, and with faculty, staff, and other students. And so I'm going to invite you to that. I think that's a wonderful thing. Our invitation email will go out on Friday. And even more so, I just want to share with you and have my friends Angela and DJ come up and share a story about how they were willing to be interrupted by one another and the beauty that their relationship has now. So welcome Angela and DJ up with me.
Hello. Oh. Hello, I'm DJ.
I'm Angela, and I first met DJ 2 years ago during orientation weekend, and it was that Sunday at a thing called Operation Adaptation, and it's an alpha event. You're on Dillon Rec Field by Adams. It's super hot. There's a lot of loud music and a lot of water games, and I went because it was like on the schedule to go, and I really did not enjoy being there. I was standing there and I was like, okay, like 5 more minutes and I'm just gonna leave. I don't like this. I don't like it's too hot, like the music is too loud. I didn't know anyone there. But there was this thought in my mind that was like, there's someone else here that feels the same way. And you're like, it's college, it's your 3rd day, just see if there's someone else that should be talked to, or that should talk to you. And so I was standing there and I was like, okay, if there's one person that also has no one to be with, I'll talk to him or her. And I was looking around and you see this girl wearing army pants, and she was just kind of like looking and didn't look super engaged. And I was like, okay, I'll say like one thing to her and then I'll leave. So I go up and I said, hey, I like your pants. And that was how I met DJ.
Yeah, so I actually don't remember the exact first time me and Angie met, but I don't even remember this interaction, but I remember another time we met, and we were on Trinity Lawn, and we started talking, and I was like, man, this girl is so sweet. She's a sweet girl. And the more we started talking, I found out that she was learning Arabic over the summer, and I was like, wow, what a shock. Like, who learns Arabic, you know? Meanwhile, I'm watching American Ninja Warrior, you know? And like, she's learning Arabic, and I was like, wow, people are awesome. That's so cool. And then as we started talking more and more, I found out that she's very caring. She's very intelligent. I was like, wow, this is a special person. And I would have never known that if we would have never spoken, you know? And she's a great person, and it's meaningful to me because, you know, you never know what kind of lessons you can learn from somebody, you know. Just even that little detail about her learning Arabic, it was encouraging to me because it showed me that I can, you know, I can do something. She's learning Arabic. No one else in her family is learning it. I can also do something, you know. So it's really encouraging, just this little detail about her life. And I really appreciated meeting Angie. She's a great person. You guys should all get to know her.
So I genuinely hope that we're willing to fast from a distraction in our lives so that we can see people that are different than us, that we can then be interrupted by the people that are different than us, whether it's about their pants or about the language that they speak or about an American Ninja Warrior. And that then we're able to actually love our neighbor and enter into community with them. So that's me landing the plane. Shalom. Go with God.